That's it, we've done it! This is the peak of humanity! We are now putting remakes in our remakes so you can remake while we remake. Thank you, Square Enix. You drove Kingdom Hearts to the ground and now you're giving Final Fantasy VII the same treatment. Ah, what a time to be alive.
Now we won't get to experience that beauty for quite some time, so I decided to check out yet another remaster. Remake? Well, it's more like a reimagining of the classic Ghosts and Goblins. And hey, they even gave it a subtitle that starts with RE, so you know this is gonna be great. Ghosts and Goblins Resurrection is Capcom's attempt to reboot the series and bring it to the modern age. The original Ghosts and Goblins was first released in arcades in 1985, but most people are familiar with the NES port. The premise is good old basic old school setup. There's a princess, evil takes princess, you are the white knight that needs to get the princess back. There have been tons of spin-offs and ports of the main line, the most frequently discussed being Super Ghouls and Ghosts. This game brought back the gameplay from the original over to the Super Nintendo, and aimed to make some improvements with it. The franchise is mostly known for its notorious difficulty, as Arthur can only take 2 hits before losing a life. To make matters worse, you will always have to complete the game twice in order to get the full ending. This is a trope I always felt made sense in the NES era, as expanding a game was difficult due to the hardware limitations. Developers always had to find a way to make their game feel long and worth the money, while under technical constraints. So now we move on to Resurrection. In my opinion, this game does not know what it wants to be. Throughout the entire game, I felt like there were 2 design ideologies that were constantly at war with each other. On one hand, it wants to live up to the ball-crushing legacy of the old games, strutting around like this ain't yo bitch-ass daddy's Ghosts and Goblins, this is pure hell. But on the other hand, they know the level of skill in game journalists these days and want to avoid the risk of being touted as too difficult and inaccessible. Now, personally speaking, I don't need every game to be balls to the walls challenging to find it to be good, but I do think a game needs to feel consistent in what it wants to be. There is nothing wrong with making a casual game or a game aimed at the hardcore audience, but the problem arises when you try to cater to both. This brings me to difficulty settings. Why do we still have these things? I always end up feeling like one of the choices is the intended vision for the game I am playing, and I just have to pick it on a gamble. My rule of thumb is to often pick the hardest, but that sometimes yields results that make for some pretty shitty experiences. It's hard to figure out if the shitty experience is coming from the poor design or my own ineptitude, so simply making it easier still leaves me wondering if I'm doing it right. It's hard to get game design right as it is, so I know there is one mode where the entire design is worked around. If I know that I'm playing that version, it makes it easier to figure out how I feel about the game itself. With Resurrection, it clearly rides the hype of the franchise, so whatever mode was closest to that design, I figured was the intended way. Looking at the choices I had, Legend seemed to be the right one. It gave me that 2 hits which the game has always been known for, so I started with that. This, however, quickly fell apart. Arthur feels so incredibly sluggish to maneuver, which wasn't something that was always the case. In fact, I immediately booted the old 2 games to make sure, and yeah, something as simple as moving forward didn't feel like you were walking through molasses with the iron boots on. They did keep the jump arc that has more commitment than a second date with a single mom, which is fine, but I honestly don't get why they removed that double jump from Super G&G. It gave you a little more control with the ability to change course once, but it still had that committed arc. For a game that aimed to inject some new life into the franchise, I don't truly understand why I take that step back. Also gone is upgrading your armor through treasure chests throughout the level. The golden armor is something you can get through the health sections or through the skill tree. Fuck the skill tree, but we will get back to it. I originally didn't even bother with the hellholes until I realized you needed them to get the true ending. This means on my first run, I never even got the armor once. It's almost like they knew those segments are so random they needed to place a rather useful tool there along with gatekeeping the true ending with it. It feels like this weird-ass padding to a franchise formula that people already found fun. It feels like the gameplay was gimped for the player, which then makes all the other bullshit that we should expect just feel much worse. Enemies having a ridiculous amount of invincibility frames when they appear, constantly respawning enemies, sections that feel that it's all about memorization. You feel less in control and everything feels less intentional. So you die over and over again. and even the checkpoints are way too far apart. The game feels like a fucking mess, and then it hit me. Maybe this difficulty is the wrong one. I imagine bashing your skull against a wall can eventually feel good after all the common sense and blood drains out, but it doesn't mean you should fucking do it. So I go back and change it to night, and suddenly the game makes way more sense. Sure, you still feel slower than a slug with an obesity problem, and fun features from the old games still remain missing, but at the very least the checkpoints make sense. You get these things called Banner of Rebirth, which are like in between checkpoints of the main checkpoints. What is even the point of making that distinction? I get the feeling that those checkpoints were always there since 3 out of the 4 modes have it, so then they had to make a game stupidly hard to compensate for it. Then they realized, oh shit, we made a pretty accessible game. Let's pander to the I gotta measure my game dick crowd and take away the checkpoints. Except they didn't realize there wasn't a good incentive to put yourself through that. Bragging rights are rarely worth it on their own, although to be fair, there are always niche communities that are driven by it, i.e. the degenerates of speedrunning. Just so we're clear, I love speedrunners and watching runs, but as Dave said it best,
speedrunning is the most degenerate act man has ever come up with.
Here is a question. What is the driving force in the single-player experience? Answer, to move fucking forward. Let's take the industry's favorite synonym for challenging.
Why are Cuphead and Crash the new
Star
Dark
Wars
Souls?
Jedi Fallen Order hands-on preview. The Dark Souls of the Force.
It's the Dark Souls of platformers.
Session is the Dark Souls of skateboarding
It's
games.
the Dark Souls of arcade games.
Twitter's Dark Souls of social media.
This game does not have difficulty settings, and by all accounts, it is a challenging game. So what makes it different that it doesn't piss me off? Well, for one thing, I know that I'm experiencing the totality of the game. I cannot go and set the difficulty lower, I simply need to get good. More importantly, if I ever want to experience the bliss that is Blighttown, I need to push forward. I can't simply go to the difficulty and experience the whole game some other easy way. The reward lies in gaining access to the game. My motivation to get better is intertwined with the protagonist's desire to press on as well. Despite my complaining about Resurrected's approach to difficulty and legend and the gameplay as a whole, I at least respect it for standing its ground while missing its mark. Games like the original Battletoads are difficult to a fault, but at least it rewards those who somehow accomplish it with more of the game along with the knowledge that they did it. Resurrection just punks out and gives you the options to see the games on your terms. If the game isn't committed to being hardcore, man, then at least it carefully thinks about how to be accessible, right? No! While the lower difficulties with the more hits and more checkpoints are a step in that direction, there are so many other choices that keep it from really making use of the new accessible approach. Why does the game have branching paths at the start instead of just more levels in a linear fashion? Why does this game have a skill tree which requires you to collect things to unlock things? If there's one thing I would never expect in a G&G game, is a fucking skill tree. I know the homogenization of games is prevalent in new IPs, but you would think you wouldn't run into this shit with an identity already established. It just reeks of arrogance to think that I would want to play these levels more than once, or twice if you want to get technical about it. Now don't misunderstand, I think the addition of skills and new moves is a great way to handle accessibility. Magic was a thing in Super Ghouls and Ghosts, so that's not what I'm against. The method in which you acquire these things, however, is just pure dog shit. Not to mention how so many of the spells are pretty lackluster. The skill tree is shit. Take the ability to store and switch weapons like it's Contra. This should have been default from the start. These games have always had the mantra of, get the knife, as it's the only weapon worth using. This is largely because when you take the weapon as a whole, it is way better to use in most situations. If one weapon renders your entire arsenal useless, then you, my friend, have a bad design. The introduction of having more than one choice, however, brings life to the other weapons, as they are better in very situational moments compared to the knife. They could have taken a page from OG Castlevania and make their level design around these potential combinations. It brings an element of strategy behind your second weapon. It makes a better fucking game. But no, instead, put it on a skill tree. Continuing the trend of one step forward and 2 steps back, they took away the life system. Now, there are no lives and you can just keep trying. This completely makes sense in an action platformer where countless deaths are expected. You die quick, so you should try again quick. So why the fuck would you not make the closest banner the default choice? I can't tell you how many times I accidentally pressed the checkpoint that was farther away because I was mashing to get back. I can give it a pass for like the first time, maybe, but once you pick the closer checkpoint, that should be the default every time. It shouldn't make you feel like you're defusing a fucking bomb every time you want to start again. I think this alone made me angry enough to write this whole video on this clunky identity crisis of a game. Fuck this game, could have been better, 5 out of 10.